I went to law school in the 1980s, not sure really what I was going to do or even if I was going to be interested in law, because it seemed like I didn't know many um, lawyers or women or what law school was about. But I was interested in how law might be a way of changing things in the world, and also that law was a way to kind of think about how things could be different. And um, and one of the things that sparked my interest about that was a kind of new wave of interest in feminist law, both in the theory and in actual changes in doctrine, like around sexual harassment and domestic violence. And so it seemed like an exciting area to kind of, I don't know, think about how to make a difference and to also challenge a lot of the things that were treated as normal. And so, so I went to law school, and then I practiced law for a number of years in a government agency in the United States, for a state government. And it was an office that regulated insurance companies and other businesses and public utilities. And so now you might wonder, like, how does that have to do with my interest in going to law school to do sort of feminist theory and feminist law reform? And actually, that was a question that really grabbed me, because when I got to law school, it was another exciting time where the women students were inspired by the clerical and other staff at the school to organize. There was a big sort of strike by some of the workers, and they were bringing up questions of race and gender and economic inequality within the school. And so the women in my law school class had similarly organized to ask questions about things. And one of the things we asked is, in every class, like, what's missing from this picture? What are we not talking about that's important, that we should be talking about? And we thought there were a lot of things that were missing. And so things like, you know, how come our family law class didn't discuss domestic violence? So in my tax class, I was sitting in a big tax lecture, and so a group of the women in the class went to the male professor, a white male professor, and said, you know, we want you to think about the gender issues in this class, both in terms of who you call on in the dynamics within the classroom, who speaks a lot, and the content. And he said, well, I'm a real feminist progressive. It shouldn't be a problem in my class. It's a problem with those other professors over there. So, you know, really, we shouldn't worry about it. And then he said, and of course, tax has nothing to do with gender. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting thing. I kind of have a contrarian bent. So as soon as he said that, I thought, okay, I got to think about that, because it doesn't sound right to me. And I knew nothing about economics or finance or business, really. But once I started to think about it, I was really interested, like, oh, there's a lot going on here. Why, you know, who gets the family income when there's a husband and wife and there's, you know, how do we decide what is deductible? Can businesses deduct their lobbying costs? Why can't I deduct the costs when I want to, like, advocate for some, you know, issue with the government? Anyway, so that got me interest in sort of business law, tax law, and how the power over money is kind of treated in a way that doesn't ask a lot of important questions about how people are affected. So that sort of led me in that direction, and I've gone in that for a long time, and so I've carried that through in a lot of different directions. In a way, I'm, a bit, I don't know, saddened or challenged by the slow progress, I would say, and the continuing, or even progress might even be a question, the way in which, as times change and as women become more prominent in leadership positions, in law, in government, in universities, sort of new ways of kind of entrenching old inequalities keep jumping up and coming back. So here I am. I've been a law professor for more than 20 years, and I think when I first went to law school, practiced law, I felt like women were just breaking in significant numbers, beyond one or two here or there, to a lot of the things I was doing and working on. But I kind of imagined, okay, in 10 years, now that there's a lot of us sort of at the new levels, junior levels coming in, it'll really be different. And I've seen in some ways things getting worse, and that even when women are there in the numbers, there's still these underlying assumptions that, I don't know, one would be that women are there kind of to serve, not to lead, that there's a kind of scrutiny of our authority or doubting of our authority, so that it's okay if we're in roles like the dutiful daughter or the good wife to the men around us. But if we start to speak up and say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right, we should do things differently, or, get angry about something, that it's treated really differently for women. And of course, it depends on other identity characteristics too, race and, your physical stature and nationality and many other things. But that there's still so many ways in which people are differentiated and are not seen for who they could be, and not given support for, these reasons of identity and social situation. In some ways, I've found some challenges outside the academy that I haven't found within, in that, like when I worked in the government office regulating businesses, a lot of the so-called clients, it was like a lot of the business executives we would deal with, for example, or a lot of the lawmakers we would deal with were white men. And I remember once my boss explicitly said, well, I don't think you should go to that meeting because, you won't have as much clout because it's all a bunch of men. And that was a while ago. But I think there's still kind of this sense that that because some of the structures of outside power, especially in business and government, are a certain way, you have to alter your behavior and cater to that. In the academy, I think it's more normal for students to be kind of diverse, and so that can be more of a plus. And the academy is supposed to be about questioning and openness, and there's been a lot of good activism within the academy, I think, about changing things, and so that's a good thing. Well, for me, what has been so important is making alliances and I'd say collective support and collective power It not just kind of complaining to other people around me, but really working together. And I think that example I had from law school was a wonderful model that I've carried through every workplace and work situation I've had. Is that, sort of came to law school, these groups of women were organizing in every class to kind of think about how we could support each other and advocate for each other. And, I did that when I was an attorney in government, and that my boss made that comment that I mentioned about, well, all the lawmakers are men. And, well, it turned out all the lawmakers were not men. There were a few women who were actually, because they were kind of excluded from some of the systems of power, they were really interested in hearing different ideas, in considering things that were off the table. And so all of a sudden we were group of women holding these meetings and coming up with a plan for one of the legal things that we were supposed to be dealing with that was really exciting and that eventually was adopted in a certain form. And so that was an experience that reminded me how much power you can have by kind of reaching out to other people and not trying to sort of just get ahead as an individual, but to think about who else may be in that situation, how you can work together. And so I think that always look for opportunities to have allies, to see what other people are struggling with, and how you can work together to do things differently. I think some of the most exciting work, both in sort of theory and ideas, as well as practical work is being done by women. And my talk today will sort of reference a couple of those sort of academic-related things, but I think the international work around women's human rights and some of the issues around rape and violence is significant, not just because of those issues in of themselves, as important as they are, but also raising broader questions about when we talk about sort of human rights, what assumptions are we making about humans, about rights? What things have been left out? How do we think about the caretaking work that so many women do? I read a lot of feminist economists who are doing really interesting work and thinking about what is the global economy, and when we think of international development and law's role in a whole range of things, from trade to development, anti-poverty work, how do we think of the work that is often informal and not counted, that women not exclusively but largely do, raising children, carrying water, cleaning dishes, the sort of home subsistence businesses, the production of food, of clothing. And I think that work is so fascinating and has so much potential to shift the foundations of what matters for law.